Father disowned me for exposing his cheating with my teacher and my neighbor. Growing up in a small town in the Midwest, I always thought my life was pretty average. My name is Zebediah, but everyone calls me Zeb. I lived with my dad, Orville, who was the high school principal, and my mom, Dolly, a homemaker. We had a seemingly perfect family, at least on the outside. The cracks started to show when I turned 16. My father began to act strangely, staying late at work, taking mysterious trips, and having hushed conversations on the landline in his study. My mother, blissfully unaware, trusted him completely. She'd always say, "Your father is just so busy, Zeb. Running a school is no easy task." One night, as I was walking home from a friend's house, I saw my dad's car parked outside Mrs. Lavinia's house. Mrs. Lavinia was my history teacher, a woman in her early 40s who always wore the most exotic perfumes. Curious and a bit suspicious, I crept closer. The lights were on, and through the window I saw my dad and Mrs. Lavinia locked in a passionate embrace. I felt my stomach churn. My father, the man I looked up to, was cheating on my mother. With my teacher, no less. I wanted to burst in and confront them, but something held me back. I needed to know more before I could blow the lid off the scandal. Over the next few weeks, I became a detective. I started noticing things I hadn't before. Dad's late-night walks, the same perfume lingering on his clothes, and his growing detachment from Mom. It was eating me alive, but I couldn't just accuse him without proof. The final straw came one Saturday afternoon. My dad told us he had to go to a principals conference in the city. My mom, always the dutiful wife, packed his bag with care. I, however, decided to follow him. I borrowed my best friend Rufus's old truck and tailed Dad to a motel on the outskirts of town. There, I saw not only Mrs. Lavinia, but also our neighbor, Mr. Jasper, a burly man with a thick mustache and a booming laugh. They all went into the motel room together. My mind raced. What the hell was going on? I waited in the truck, my heart pounding. Hours passed, and when they finally emerged, their disheveled appearance told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just an affair. It was a tangled web of deceit involving more people than I had imagined. I drove home, my hands shaking. I had to tell someone. But who? Rufus was the only person I could trust. When I spilled the beans to him, he couldn't believe it. "Zeb, this is some twisted shit. You gotta do something." Armed with my newfound knowledge, I decided it was time to confront my father. I waited until the next family dinner. The tension was thick in the air, and I could barely touch my food. My mom noticed and asked, "Zeb, are you feeling all right?" "No, Mom, I'm not," I replied, my voice shaking. "I have something to tell you both." My father's face turned pale, and he gave me a warning look. I didn't care. "Dad's been cheating on you, Mom, with Mrs. Lavinia and Mr. Jasper." My mother dropped her fork, her face ashen. "What are you talking about, Zebediah?" I told her everything. What I saw, what I knew. My father tried to interrupt, but I wouldn't let him. "You've been lying to us, Dad. How could you do this?" Orville stood up, his face red with rage. "You don't know what you're talking about, boy. You're just a kid." "I'm not a kid anymore," I shouted back. "I saw you with my own eyes. You're a liar and a cheat." My mother started to cry, and for a moment, I regretted the pain I was causing her. But she needed to know the truth. Orville stormed out of the house, leaving my mother in tears. I went to her, but she pushed me away. "Why, Zeb? Why did you have to tell me this?" The days following the confrontation were a blur. My father moved out and went to stay with Mrs. Lavinia. My mother was a wreck, and I felt like the cause of all the chaos. School was a nightmare. Whispers followed me everywhere, and teachers looked at me with pity. One day, I couldn't take it anymore. I skipped class and went to the local diner where Rufus worked. I needed to clear my head. As I sat there nursing a soda, Mr. Jasper walked in. He saw me and came over, his face a mix of guilt and anger. "You had no right, Zeb," he said, sitting down across from me. "You've ruined everything." "You ruined it first," I shot back. You and my dad, how could you do this to my mom?" Mr. Jasper sighed. "It's complicated. Things aren't always black and white. Your dad, Lavinia, and I, we were just trying to find happiness." "Happiness?" I nearly shouted. "You call this happiness? Destroying families?" He looked down. "You don't understand now, but you will one day. Sometimes people make mistakes." I left the diner more confused than ever. How could they justify what they had done? Weeks turned into months, and the dust began to settle. My mom slowly started to piece her life back together, and I tried to focus on school, but the rift between me and my father only grew wider. He refused to talk to me, blaming me for exposing his secrets and ruining his life. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, there was a knock on my door. It was my mom. "Zeb, we need to talk." We sat down, and she took my hand. "I know things have been hard, but you did the right thing. Your father, he made his choices, and now he has to live with them." "I just wanted to protect you, Mom," I said, my voice breaking. She hugged me tightly. "I know, honey, and I'm proud of you for standing up for the truth. It's not easy, but it's the right thing to do." Eventually, my father and Mrs. Lavinia left town, unable to face the scandal. Mr. Jasper's wife divorced him, and he moved away too. Life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, but the scars remained. I learned a lot from that experience. Life isn't always fair, and the people we look up to can disappoint us in the worst ways. But I also learned the importance of truth and the strength it takes to stand up for what's right, even when it tears you apart inside. And so, I moved forward carrying the lessons and the pain, knowing that I had done the right thing, no matter the cost.